All right, welcome back to our Plato class. Today I want to talk with you guys about what's called the city-soul analogy in Plato's Republic. But first, I want to introduce you to a very special guest that we have in today's class. This is Sloan. This is my daughter. Sloan, are you excited to be here? Okay, I'll take that as mild enthusiasm. Now, Plato's city-soul analogy is something that he devises and gets going directly after Glaucon's challenge, which we had talked about last week. We see the city-soul analogy first being given voice at 368 C of the Republic. So please turn your pages there. The analogy starts with Socrates talking about letters. Of course, we're very comfortable and accustomed to Socrates kind of taking us in interesting directions whenever he wants to wage a new argument. So we shouldn't be too surprised by this seemingly random discussion of letters. We're used to randomness here. But what Socrates reports about the conversation is this: Glaucon and the others begged me not to abandon the argument, but to help in every way to track down what justice and injustice are and what the truth about their benefits is. So he's saying everyone in the conversation over at Cephalus's house wanted Socrates to continue to try to defend justice, to make an account of what each of justice and injustice are. So I told them what I had in mind. The investigation we're undertaking is not an easy one, but requires keen eyesight. Therefore, since we aren't clever people, we should adopt the method of investigation that we'd use if, lacking keen eyesight, we were told to read small letters from a distance, and then noticed that the same letters existed elsewhere in a larger size and on a larger surface. We'd consider it a godsend, I think, to be allowed to read the larger ones first, and then to examine the smaller ones to see whether they really are the same. Now, what he's saying is that whenever we're looking at letters, now take this quite literally, whenever we're looking at letters, it's easier to make out what the letters are if they're close up to us. So check this out. You can tell what letter that is because it's very close to the screen right now, right? And when I hold it very far away like this, it's much more difficult to make out what that letter is. This is sensible enough. But what does all of this have to do with our discussion in the Republic? What do you think, Sloan? Exactly. What Socrates is trying to say is that we want to look at an instance of justice that is like the large letters in the sense that it is on a large scale. Once we see the form of justice, the one form of justice, in a large scale, like large letters, then we'll be able to make out that same form in the small scale of justice in, whatever shape it takes that's more like the small letters. He thinks that cities are like the large letters. They put the form of justice on display in the large, in kind of the large, highly visible form, whereas justice in an individual is like small letters, and you can see the form in it, but it'll be on a much smaller scale. So he invites us to look at the form of justice, the one form of justice in the scale of a city, before we go to look at the form of justice in an individual, because it'll be easier to see. This is why the analogy is called the city-soul analogy. It's because Socrates is going to make the case that justice, the one form of justice, will have to be the same in the city and in an individual soul. And so looking at the large letters of the city will mean that we'll know what the form is when we see it in the individual soul. The Republic depends on the city-soul analogy. It depends on this idea that the form of justice itself is going to be the same in the city as it is in the soul, so that the way that we can proceed in determining what that form is by looking at each of these larger and smaller scale instances of the form. Plato needs it to be the case that there is sufficient similarity between the city and the soul for this analogy to go through, for his whole method to really go through. And if at any point the analogy or the similarities between city and soul break down at the kind of crucial points of similarity, then his argument isn't going to go through. He's going to have to make the case for us that cities and souls are sufficiently similar, or else he's going to fail to show us what the form of justice is in the soul. So that's the city-soul analogy. Thank you to my lovely assistant today. Thank you, Sloan. Yes, very helpful. And I will see you all in discussion a little bit later. Thanks.